Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Teachers Aligned podcast. I'm your host, Todd Scholl. This is episode number 34. And when we're recording this is a beautiful Sunday afternoon. I hope it's beautiful where you are, whenever you happen to be listening to this particular episode. And I do wish all of you wellness and happiness and freedom from suffering. And I hope that this episode today is going to bring you some joy and peace and inspiration. My guest today is the award-winning author of Bowing to Elephants, Tales of a Travel Junkie. It hit number 1 in 5 countries on the day it was launched and just won Best Indie Biographies and Memoirs from Kirkus. Her book has been compared to Eat, Pray, Love in professional reviews and has received numerous accolades from many thought leaders in the mindfulness space, including Jack Kornfield. It's full of stories of her travels around the world, self-discovery, healing, food, and so much more. She's been a world traveler since the age of 11. She lived with her mother in Italy for 3 years and has traveled across the globe. And some of those experiences are in her book. And it's just amazing, all the places that she's been. Once a 10-year hospice volunteer, she is a practicing Buddhist and dedicated member of Spirit Rock Meditation Center north of San Francisco. Her essays are on Elephant Journal, being read by almost 2 million people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to bring to you today Mag Dimond. How are you doing today, Mag?
Doing fine. How are you doing? I'm
doing okay. Just got back from a run and feeling pretty good. Feeling light and well. So I love having these conversations. And I was reading through your book earlier today, and you really took Carpe Diem to heart, didn't you? I mean, you really have just, said, I'm going to suck the marrow out of this life that I've got. I'm so impressed with all of the places you've been and sort of reading through the thoughts that you had as you've been to all those places. Let's start just sort of talking about what drew you to traveling, because obviously that's been a passion of yours. What is it about traveling that you love so much?
Well, I think because I had an inquiring mind from the time I was a young girl. I was an only child, and I grew up with a lot of adults who were intellectual but not really interested in dealing with me or listening to me. And so I didn't get very many answers to questions that I had and concerns that I voiced. So I was unsatisfied and sort of wanting to find out more about my world. And when we lived in Italy, I had an opportunity there to, of course, have a whole different, be part of a whole different culture. And see how rich it was and see how kind of, what an interesting experience it was to be a visitor in a different culture. So that was 3 years of my life, and I came back at 14 or so, and I went on with the normal course of events like high school and the rest of it. But I always felt that there was a great deal to be had from going outside my familiar zone and learning things. And I was a very well-read person always. And so I knew about different cultures. I knew about even India, and I knew about Southeast Asia and that sort of thing. And so I wondered a lot about places. And eventually in my life, and sort of in middle age, I started to take on this whole campaign of travel. I did it with someone that I lived with. I did it with my husband, and then another person, and then ultimately I did it by myself. Yeah. But it's really a journey of learning. It's a journey of finding out not only what's going on in other places, but like who you are. You learn who you are by seeing yourself in a foreign environment. Really, you really can understand yourself very well, and so it's a great self-revelatory experience.
Yeah, I think there's something about traveling when you do it with genuine curiosity and really kind of an open mind, that you never come back the same person. That there's something about you has shifted. Even if like my son and I went to Montreal and Quebec City last year, and every time I go away, even just a short trip to the mountains, there's something when you come back. I think it helps give you this reframing of your life. And I imagine with the diverse experiences that you've had, being really in so many different types of environments and cultures, that there was this evolutionary process of who Mag Dimond was becoming with each one of these trips. At least that's kind of what I was reading throughout the book. Is that accurate? And would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've used a quote somewhere in the book. I quote the great travel writer Paul Thoreau, who has produced volumes of wonderful essay collections about his journeys. I mean, he's been everywhere, and he also was responsible for that great book called Mosquito Coast, which of
Okay.
course was made into a movie. But he is a lifelong traveler, and he said that in a sort of personal introduction to a book, he said, I travel in order to find out who I am.
Yeah.
And I really, when I read that, I hadn't really, figured out myself. I hadn't dissected anything myself and said, okay, I'm doing all this traveling so I can figure myself out better. But when I read that quote, I went, the light bulb, flashed at me, and I went, yeah, that's it. Because as a child, I was not witnessed, and I was not really regarded with great attention. In a way, I didn't know myself. I didn't know who I was. I knew what was going on inside me, and emotionally, and and mentally, but I didn't really know who I was as a human being. And so, I went looking for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that I think we have like this yearning for travel. In one sense, it's just curious about how other people live, and just seeing other things that we don't normally see in our regular day. But there's also something I think that we're searching for. Like maybe there's something we feel that's missing inside us that we're going to find somewhere in our journeys. And I think traveling can do that. But then also sometimes, like I've heard, sages and stuff talk about that, we're so busy looking externally for what we feel like we're missing. And really the journey we need to take is on the inside. And I think you kind of are talking about both of those things in the book as this external journey, and then also this inner journey. Maybe you could talk about the differences between those and how they kind of work together.
Yeah, there are two journeys really, and I kept a notebook. Everywhere I went, I had a notebook with me where I recorded what I was doing, what I was seeing, what I was eating, and all the rest of it. Because I knew I wouldn't be able to remember everything, and this was my way of chronicling not only what I was seeing, but how I felt about what I was seeing. So what it meant to go and sit inside a church and smell the candles burning and have all this rush of feeling about the power of the spiritual practice, whether it's in a Catholic church in Italy or in a temple in Burma,
Right.
So this chronicling of my feelings, and of course became necessarily the fodder for my book when I decided to write all these pieces. And so that is part of the internal process I was going through. It wasn't as important like what I accomplished and what I did. It was really more important what it was leading me to think and feel and understand about myself and about my fellow humans. Because that's part of the wonderful adventure, is that you meet all these different people, and then you see that they're not really all that different from you. They may look different, but they're not.
Yeah. It's I'm wondering like too, cause, you talk about mindfulness and, sometimes I notice myself when I'm traveling somewhere that I'm so wrapped up in, especially on the journey there or the journey home, that I'm so wrapped up on, I've got to make this flight, or I've got to, if I'm driving, I've got to pay attention and think about, always thinking forward, like where do I get off, and where's the next direction. And sometimes even during the trip, you can get so caught up in that itinerary and that agenda of like, okay, well, we've got to be here for this tour at 1:00. And I think sometimes I've noticed anyway, for me, when I take trips, that I'm coming from sometimes like this, my home environment, where there's an agenda and a to-do list and a time schedule. And then I'm still in that frame of that sort of that mode when I get to the trip, and it takes me a couple of days to kind of let go of that and then just be immersed in the experience and be present for the experience. Through the course of your travels, what role has mindfulness played in the way you've experienced other places?
Well, it'll, first of all, it slows me down. I wanted to think of sort of the bottom line thing, and that is that the people that rush through cities and towns are not really gaining very much in the experience. So when I go places, I walk slowly, and I pay attention to my environment, and I pay attention to all the elements of the environment. And I take my practice with me. I meditate every morning. I sit for half an hour. I do that before I do anything else, and I find that I can take that out into the world, and, as I say, move with deliberation and with less speed, and more, this sort of understanding of my awareness. Like, one of my teacher, Jack Kornfield, really says we are awareness. That's what we are. We are the embodiment of awareness. And many times we don't kind of get that, or we haven't turned our minds in that direction to understand that. But we have this amazing capacity to be aware. And so I stop a lot. I stop a lot, and I just look at things. I sit on benches. Sometimes I just stop and I write something down because I want to remember it. And including, kind of the emotional stream that goes through you. There's times when you feel, this wash over you of maybe of nostalgia, of feeling of loneliness, and like longing for your grandmother's, things that kind of come at us randomly because we are not in control. I mean, any practitioner of mindfulness knows that we don't determine what comes streaming through our mind. And you can be in some very unusual place and all of a sudden have this longing for, or maybe just a longing for your own, for your cat at home, sitting with your cat, or longing for, conversation with your best friend.
Yeah.
Those things happen. And like I say, if you're moving slowly and calmly like that, and you have that sort of discipline of awareness, and then you feel all these things, and they come and they go.
Yeah. Yeah. I catch myself on trips, just as an example, like I'll be sitting there eating a really great meal at a restaurant I've never been to before. But my attention goes to like, okay, well, we have to be to this concert by 5:00, and then I'm not even present for the meal anymore. And I think sometimes that's how we do trips. We we do trips, we try to pack so much in and fit so much in, because most of us, when we go on trips, we're taking time off of work, we're traveling somewhere for a very compressed amount of time, we're trying to fit as much experience as we can in, and then the experience ends up being an inch, mile wide and an inch deep, versus, to me, from reading about your travels, it's more like a mild, like you're fully immersed. You're trying to be fully immersed there as a human being, to take it all in, rather than to just like take some tour bus and skim through it. And like you said, just drive through the city and here's this, here's this, here's this. It's like sitting with it and being with it is a different type of traveling. Is that a fair description of how you approach traveling?
Yeah. I mean, when, many of my journeys have been, as I said earlier, sort of solo, or with a companion. And then a couple of times I've taken group trips. When I went to China, I went with a group because it was necessary. It was clear to those of us involved in the idea that we needed to go with a group. And when I went to India for the first time, I went with a group. And there it's different, because there you don't have the freedom to make your own, to make your day the way you want it. So, you would, in a group trip, you'd be getting up and having breakfast at the same time, and then getting on a bus, and then going here and then going there. And that is not my first love, clearly, as you can imagine from what I've said. And when I do things by myself, I have an idea of what I'm going to do in a given day, but I'm really flexible. And I think if something happens that draws my attention somewhere else, I will do that instead. And I have the luxury, I have to point out that I have always had the luxury of having a lot of time to do these trips.
Yeah.
Many people, they have a 2-week vacation, that's what they have.
Right.
And they feel in 2 weeks they're supposed to do more than go to one place. So they're constrained by that. But that was never a problem with me. I could go and I could say, I'm going to spend 2 weeks in this one town, and I'm just going to stay here and get to know it. And because I could do that, I had that freedom.
Yeah. I think there's also like this approach to traveling too, not even just the amount of time, but like, are you going as a tourist and want to do the whole tourist thing? Or do you want to go and try to experience it as though you're really there and not an outsider, but trying to see it from the inside, if that makes sense? And so when you see some shows, Anthony Bourdain comes to mind, just these shows where they're approaching it just very differently. It's not about like, having the hat and the t-shirt and going to the souvenir shop, and like there's parts of, like, we went to Montreal, there's parts of Montreal clearly designed for the tourist experience. But then
Right.
those other parts of Montreal that you go to and you feel what it's like. This is what everyday life is like here for people. And I find those experiences to be more enriching and more like, so I come back with more from those types of experiences than I do from visiting the tourist shop and all that. I think there's value probably in both, but the actual experience of everyday living in those places feels like a more valuable thing to take home.
Well, I think it's a lived experience. It's a concrete experience that coming together with people the way Anthony Bourdain does. I just recently started rewatching some of his shows because I think they're brilliant, actually. And I think, I feel an affinity for him in that he's a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. He gets in with he sits down with the people. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
And that's a lived concrete thing. Now, if you're doing the classic tourist experience, it's like you're going in there and you're picking up some tidbits, picking up some bits and pieces of what the culture, what the place is about, but you're not having a lived experience.
Right.
It's like you're going in as a consumer and you're shopping around and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of this, I'm going to do the Eiffel Tower, and I'm going to run over here and do this, and then you feel like you're just picking those things up and trying to take them with you. And yes, you can have some nice memories from that. There's no reason why you can't. But the idea of really putting yourself in a position of being with people and seeing how they live and how they do what they do,
Yeah.
is so much richer, because that allows you to feel a part of that, as Bourdain clearly does in all his programs. It's like he becomes a citizen of Vietnam when he's in Vietnam, and he's a
Right.
citizen, right? And that's the way I like to feel about myself. That, I mean, yes, I will admit I'm a visitor. I'm a person from a different land, but I also really feel strongly that we're all us humans are so interconnected and related, and it's so exciting and inspiring to kind of feel that bond when you're in a totally unusual and unique and different place.
Yeah. And I think that's the mindfulness, the regular mindfulness practice, is so there's kind of like this awakening that takes place, so that when you go to those places and you have that, you don't get into that mindset of a tourist. You get more of it as just like this human being trying to see the connections and trying to understand the sort of the cornucopia of human experience, and you're awake to that, and it's and without judgment too. That's the other thing I think that sometimes as travelers we bring when we go to other places, is we have this very sort of whatever Eurocentric, egocentric type view, like, oh, isn't that weird, isn't that quaint, isn't that, we make these value statements and judgments about how other people do things rather than just being with it. Would you agree with that? Like, do you think that sort
Yeah.
of analytical mind, that judging mind, if you're able to let it go, changes the travel experience?
Yeah. And I think that, like when you're on group trips, for instance, I'm thinking now of being in India and listening to this guy who was our sort of official leader, and he was an expert on history and art and culture and all that stuff. And he made many judgment calls about India. And some of the stuff he said was interesting and thought provoking. And some of the stuff was really, for me, off-putting, because he was making judgments that I didn't necessarily trust. And so yeah, you can take those judgments with you and say, okay, well, in India, this is the way it is, and this is why it is this way, because maybe somebody told you that, and then you go off with that assumption. But that's different than you presenting yourself, head on with your own awareness and your own mind and heart, and you
Right.
discovering what's there for yourself. Because it's tidy for these tour leaders to have all these catchphrases and this is the way, and this is the way it is, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't allow people to think imaginatively about the place that they're visiting and the people who live there.
Right.
That's something that's very special if you just allow yourself to have the experience.
Yeah. I noticed in the dedication of the book, you talk about your grandmother, who's your hero and who shaped your path, and then you talk about you describe your mother as reckless, who offered beauty and broke your heart. And in reading more about it, you said that you lived as an only child of an alcoholic narcissist, and you mentioned this earlier, that you didn't feel witnessed as a child, and that these travels allowed you to witness yourself as you went through these journeys. If you don't mind, talk about how your experience with your mom and maybe even with your grandmother shaped the person that you became and made you a traveler, made you a world traveler. How did one lead to the other?
Well, as I said earlier, this curiosity I had, this hunger for learning, I was always a good student. So that was one sort of a constant. But in terms of my mother, the thing that was hurtful, that was probably the most hurtful over the long run, was this sort of disregard for my questions and disregard for my feelings and disregard for all of this. And I felt that that again, I wasn't being seen. And she didn't know any better. I mean, I didn't understand that till much later. She did not know how to be a mother. And I felt like I had to sort of grow up on my own. But guess what? I had the great advantage of my grandmother, who was close by, living in San Francisco, who was my father's mother, not my mother's mother. And she took me under her wing, really almost literally. And I spent a great deal of time with her. And she was a woman of huge heart. She adored me from top to bottom. And she taught me just endless things and gave me this unconditional love and faith in who I was. And so that, made me feel like I had some solidity.
Yeah.
I think if I hadn't had that, I don't know if I could have gone out into the world to explore it. I mean, my mother, showed me things that were quite wonderful. I mean, she was a painter, and I learned about art from being around my mother, and that stimulated my interest in art. But my grandmother had this sense of adventure and curiosity and compassion for all human beings that I kind of felt like that I had some of that too, and that I wanted to go find out about that. And my grandmother had been a traveler herself when she had been younger, and with my grandfather, and I think even after he died, she did a little bit of traveling. And she knew 3 different languages. She studied these languages. She had a prodigious mind, and I was aspired to be like her.
Mm.
And yet, what my mother showed me by taking me to Italy was pivotal. I mean, it was huge, because if I know that if that hadn't happened, I mean, who knows? I mean, I probably wouldn't have done all this travel. I mean, it's hard to say, but so that my gratitude goes out to both of them, because there were gifts on both sides. Yes, there was the broken heart. And then ultimately, I was able to find the forgiveness for my heart being broken, to know that my mother couldn't do anything other than what she did. And so to know that a lot of my appreciation for beauty and culture and even literature came from being around my mother.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if you would agree with this. I've noticed that a lot of times the pain that we experience, especially pain that we feel from the actions and words of other people, there's like almost an alchemical process that takes place where we can transmute that pain into beautiful things. Like it's almost like you take this ingredient of pain and find a way to turn it into something beautiful, which is a really hard process. And especially when you're going through the pain, it's hard to see that. But would you say that some of the pain that you experienced as a child is what led to the beauty that you experience today? And if so, how?
Yeah. Well, I think the writing that I did all my life in my journals, in my notebooks, that was me taking pain and transmuting it in a way. It was taking it and letting it kind of manifest, and then, move through me. I also, I played the piano. pretty seriously from the time I was about 8. That was a great outlet for me. Particularly when I was feeling melancholy and sad.
Yeah.
I have strong memories of sitting at the piano and playing when I felt like I was crushed or deeply sad, and playing the classical music that I played, Chopin, Bach, that playing that music healed me. It really made it was like I all of a sudden was being held in a soft, comforting cocoon of some kind, and I got to make music. I got to hear that I myself was the vehicle for making music, which is kind of exciting. I mean, it was exciting to me. Later on, I did a whole bunch of years where I made jewelry, and I decided I wanted to use my hands more, and then I give my brain a rest. And so I took this up and collected old beads and made these rather unusual necklaces out of often ancient rare beads.
Yeah.
And I started a little business, in fact, in San Francisco, and I did it for about 3 years. And this was a way I could take really heartache that I was feeling. And at this period of my life, the heartache had less to do with my mother than with the person that I had chosen to be with at that time, who was a hurtful person, and a person that I thought was going to give me love and all the rest of it, and couldn't. And so when I made the jewelry, I felt myself being kind of made manifest. I was, as a creative person, and that allowed me to feel better about myself.
Yeah.
It didn't make the heartache necessarily vanish, but you could take that sadness and you make something good out of it. I mean, plenty of writers and plenty of composers that I know about in classical music, many of them were very unhappy people.
Yeah.
And they took their deep dissatisfaction or suffering, whatever you want to call it, and they made something from it.
Right. We use the term magic, and we think of it's like, okay, someone waves a wand and pulls a rabbit out of a hat. But I think what's more magical, like a trick like that, or taking pain and creating art, creating music that's beautiful, that I think that's a form of magic. I think that's and then knowing that someone else wears that jewelry or hears that music and can be transformed by it and can feel something from it.
Right.
It's a form of magic. It's a more profound form of magic than anything you'd see in a Las Vegas show. And I think we underestimate it and discount it.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up listening to, my mother was a great fan of jazz, and I grew up listening to jazz, and she knew a lot about the jazz musicians and so on. And they all had really hard lives, those men. I mean, they were, 90% of them were Black, poor. I mean, all the rest of it. And when you think about the blues, which of course is a uniquely American form of music, we all know where the blues come from, right? It comes from that deep, dark and unhappy place.
Yeah.
But there is the transformation that happens there too, through the singing and through the dancing and the playing of the instrument, all that stuff. And I think my mother, when she painted as a young woman, and she had, I don't know if she was really terribly unhappy. I know she was dissatisfied with her lot, and she realized she didn't love my father, and she didn't really know who she was. But I know that when she made her paintings, she made herself happier. She did something for herself that was unique, and she produced some really stunning abstract paintings.
Yeah. it's almost like a transconfiguration of pain and stuff that's going on inside us. Like you mentioned the blues, and yeah, I think about, we have thoughts about death and how we process trauma and how we process the pain and the heartbreak and all of the sort of negative experiences that a human can go through. And it is weird that some of the most beautiful books and movies and songs come out of that pain. And I think it's just a really beautiful thing to think about, because I think it offers a certain type of hope. I mean, like you said, it's not necessarily going to get rid of the pain, but the fact that something can grow out of that pain that's beautiful is a hopeful
Yeah,
idea.
it's like the phoenix rising from the ashes kind of thing. And I think that the writing of the book too, that's just sort of the whole icing on the whole cake thing, because
Yeah.
the making of the book, which was obviously difficult, as creating any book is, and yet it was necessary. There was an imperative in me to write this book, and once I got it done, and once I had people read it and respond, I realized I had done something very special, and that I had taken my story of what I thought was a fair amount of sort of suffering and difficulty, and I had made that story sort of a redeeming story for people to read about,
Mm.
and because they could follow me as I was able to have some distance and to forgive my mother, and to find that sort of freedom, and also along with practicing Buddhism. So it was like this journey of mine was able to kind of stand up there as an example for people who read the book, and remind them that, yes, you too, yeah, if you think you had a miserable life, or you've had an unsatisfactory life, or whatever, you've got to know that you can make something out of it, that we have choices, and we can do that.
Yeah, there's like your book's kind of like a story of liberation from that pain, I think, and that's what it seems like to me. And I'm curious about how you, if you would share with our listeners, how you got connected to Buddhism. Like, at what point in your life did that connection take place, and why, and what is it that's drawn you to those particular practices?
Well, I was living in northern New Mexico at the time, and it was in the early 90s. So however many years, 30 years ago now. Oh my God. Okay. and I had, my marriage of 25 years had ended. My children were grown up adults on their own trajectory. My two daughters. I left California and moved to northern New Mexico with this artist who I felt was going to offer me a remarkable opportunity to be free and happy and adored and all the rest of it. And of course, none of that came true. Going to northern New Mexico was a great gift for other reasons aside from this person. But while I was there, I embarked on a teaching career. So I started teaching writing to community college students, and I made a lot of friends in the arts and in the sort of the small culture of Taos, New Mexico, which is a quite special little town. And but I was very, very unhappy, and I was also very unhealthy. I was feeling very just tired and not well. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was just that I was not healthy, and I hated the idea of going to the doctor, because I was afraid that the doctor would tell me that something really dramatic was wrong with me. And my mother had been very fearful about doctors too, so I came by it honestly.
Mm-hmm. Been there.
But I did find this woman who was a body worker, and who was also a Buddhist, and and I went for sessions with this woman, and she did this massage, and also with these stones where they heat the stones up and roll them across your back and all that. She and I got to know each other pretty well, and we're sort of friends. And she at one point told me that she felt this enormous amount of suffering that was being held in my body. And I said, yeah, you're right. I'm just, you know, I don't know what to do about it. It's overwhelming. And then she started to talk about meditation practice. And she said, you might want to just see how you feel about meditation practice. And Tao's had a lot of little spiritual offshoots. It was one of those, definitely a counterculture
Yeah.
world, and there was everything there to be had. And I said to her things like, "Oh, Diane, I don't think I can meditate. I mean, I can't. Can I sit still and be quiet and all that?" Because I had a very busy mind. My mind was very busy, worrying a lot, of course.
Right. Yeah.
And she said, well, it's not that hard, Meg. And actually, there's a little piece in the book where I describe this moment. And she said, really, it's very easy. It's just about being in the present moment and allowing yourself to just be there and feel what you feel and be in touch with your breath and your whole body, and give yourself some space and some care. And so anyway, she said those things, and there was no pressure. And I went away, and then I decided that I would do that. I would find a little meditation group, sitting group, and I would go and see what it was like. And I went, and it was the very first night I went. I walked into this room with these people all sitting on cushions on the floor, and I felt like I was being welcomed into some sort of wonderful, nurturing place. And I sat and I followed the instructions, and I didn't have a problem being quiet for whatever it was, 40 minutes or the sitting. And then there was a little talk. And when I left there, I knew that I had found something that was deeply important, and that made so much sense to me. The idea of non-harming, the idea of compassion, all these things that my grandmother, in fact, had manifested when I was a young girl. I just thought, how can I not make this a part of my life? And I never stopped going after that. It was like as I said in the book, I never looked back. I just kept going to groups, and eventually when I came back to California, I went on actual residential retreats, and when I started it became a part of integral part of my life, because one of the things I found there was I found an ability to love myself, and to forgive myself for all the mistakes I thought I'd made, and all the insufficiencies and all the things that were wrong, and I knew that was so important for me to cultivate that I think people can self-destruct under that self-hatred thing. I think it's a horrible state for humans to be in.
Yeah.
And I wanted to learn more of the Buddha's teachings, because it all, like I say, it felt like common sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how it's felt for me too. I think that growing up, at least I was talking about this morning, and growing up, I grew up as a Mormon, and then left the church when I was 18 and struggled with my sort of religious identity. And I think sometimes we think about religion as this thing that we've got to adopt, and it's kind of binary. Either we're full on that thing or not. And I think with Buddhism, it's just a different thing, because at least for me, my experience has just been, look, this isn't something you've got to buy. It's like you just study the teaching and then apply that and then experience it, and you see, oh yeah, I'm creating a lot of my own suffering, and when I stop clinging to things and I can meditate and sort of deconstruct the ego a little bit and sort of recognize, who I really am, what I really am, like that you start to wake up from that. then your suffering starts to reduce, and then you start developing that self-compassion, and you have more capacity to have compassion for other people and forgive other people. There's no necessarily a metaphysical faith claim there. It's just the reality of the experience of practicing what the Buddha taught. And that's what it sounds like for me that you're saying too. I don't maybe for you it's you took a different approach.
No, I think that's about right. I think that the discovery that Jack Kornfield says many times over that the Buddha had proclaimed in one of his suttas and whatever, that there is no one more deserving of love than yourself. And so I took on metta practice, loving kindness practice with a vengeance, because I knew that it was going to be a helpful path for me. That through that path, that because I would be able to cultivate this care for myself, it would expand what I could do in relation to others, even those people that I found really difficult or really painful to be with. The Dalai Lama once said in a teaching, a big group teaching thing that I went to, he said, if you want to it's wonderful to want to bring peace into the world. It's a noble ambition, but first you have to bring peace into yourself,
right?
To yourself. So it all starts with yourself.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you only think about yourself. It doesn't mean that you become self-absorbed and only interested in your own, welfare, but you learn to tend yourself, to care for yourself and the body that you're inhabiting, that isn't really who you are, but it is your body that you need to take care of and be responsible for. And all these things that never had occurred to me as a young person, I grew up around people who were totally disconnected from their bodies and or had loathing for their bodies or whatever. And I sort of had some of that as a young girl, and I was always overweight. And so that made it even, more likely that I would be, horrible around my sort of self-image and how I saw my body. Yeah, it's an amazing, the path is really simple, and it's hard to get there, because really not that you're getting anywhere, but it's hard to inhabit this path, because it really requires that you keep coming back to it and keep putting yourself in the position of being with everything that happens to you, good, bad, and neutral,
Yeah, and I found that it's easy to get lost in you're trying to solve the core problem you're trying to solve with, well, if I could just move here or have this relationship or have this job or buy this thing, that's where the ultimate answer is. That's where you get caught up in looking outside yourself for the answers, when when the answer really is doing the work inside. And most people want to just shy away from that, thinking that if I can just arrange everything outside of myself just so, then I'll feel that sense of peace and well-being, and never thinking that really is shifting something on the inside so that there's equanimity about the life that unfolds, regardless of how it unfolds. Not that there won't be pain and ups and downs, but that the framing of all of it and the way we perceive our lives, the lens through which we perceive our lives, all that work has to be done within the self, and you can't escape that. You can't escape that if you want to find a lasting sort of solution to this problem of suffering.
Right. I mean, many of my teachers have given wonderful talks about how people think that, people who don't, understand the Buddhist path will think that, if you just sit down and meditate, you can change your whole personality. It's like that feeling of you can go out and if you go out and have this intense experience, it will change who you are, which of course is not correct, because it will incline your mind. And if you have I go and sit in silence for 2 weeks and have a lot of insight and a lot of important experiences, it will change. It will lean you toward this self-love, increased compassion, more insight, all the rest of it. But it's not going to change who you are. Right. And because we're in this culture that's materialistic, and people think that if they go to the gym and get fit and do all, that they'll become a new person, and they'll become a better, not only they'll become a better,
or more worthy of compassion too, more worthy
right.
of love and admiration. If you change the way your body looks, you'll be more
Right.
worthy. Yeah.
Right. And the Buddha really wasn't about, it was about leading a life of non-harming and leading a life of awareness and presence. And so, yeah, it's and that does take some doing. I mean, it takes you sticking with it. But the thing that I saw about it along the way was that the things that I was understanding as it went along over these years were so powerful and were so important that I didn't even think about, it being work to sit on a regular basis, or to take a class here and there about of the teachings, or whatever, because the stuff I was learning was so important, and it was transformational for me. I mean, after I made that choice to start sitting and be a part of the practice, have the practice be part of me, it changed a ton of things in my life. I was able to get rid of the relationship that was, because I could see it so clearly for the harming energy that it was producing. And so I could do that, and I could return back to San Francisco, where I really needed to be closer to my family. And I could take up the Zen hospice volunteer work that I had really been so much wishing to do, to make choices for myself. And they were wholesome and productive choices. They were, and because of the practice, I got the clarity, to be able to say, yeah, this is what I must do. This is how I must be leading my life.
Yeah, I think that is. I was talking to someone yesterday about how, the mindfulness practice is really good as a stress reduction technique, but if we only look at it as stress reduction, you're missing out on what you just said, which is this clarity and these insights that we have. Because if you're just looking at it as, I'm just going to sit on a cushion for 30 minutes and that's my practice, and you're not taking the insights, there's no insights to the other 23 and a half hours of your day. I think that there's a missing out there of something really precious and wonderful and helpful in the way we navigate the regular part of our lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, ideally it is a way of life, and I've been in Southeast Asia enough to see that play out, and that's why traveling in countries like, Cambodia and Burma and so on is so rewarding, because you see the whole life is about practice, and it's about cultivating these qualities of humane, loving,
right,
clear thinking qualities. So, when you grow up in a culture where religion seems to be defined as something you go to church for, or you go over here and you do this, and then you go back to your life, and then you do your life, that never made sense to me growing up. I remember I was very anti-religion when I was a kid, and I sort of called myself an atheist without really understanding what atheism was. But we, in this country, in the United States, we've had it separated,
right.
And in Asia, and even in India, the spiritual practice is a living, breathing thing. It's the way of life. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it seems like religion oftentimes, especially in this country and in the West, is the message is you're not worthy. You're not worthy of anything. You're actually worthy of eternal hellfire and torture. until you adopt this set of practices. Whereas this other message is you're already worthy. You just need to recognize the worthiness that's inherently there. You just need to recognize and have compassion for what's already there. We don't need to add anything, subtract anything. And I think those are two very, very different messages and play a role in our psychology and how we operate in life, because so many of our relationships then become about, well, you have to do certain things to be worthy, and there are certain conditions under which you will get my love, or there are only certain conditions under which you will love me, so I've got to fit in those, instead of just saying, like, it's already there. The worthiness is already there.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a given. And the other thing that it occurred to me, and I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, that was so kind of had such an impact on me from the start with Buddhism was the fact that judgment, that judgment is absent. People are not called evil and bad. They could be called unwholesome. They could be making unwholesome choices or unproductive choices, but there is not that judgment that was so in our culture, again, our Western Christian culture, so prevalent. And I know people who are raised Catholic who've talked to me at great length about sort of the rigors of being a Catholic and all the judgment that gets heaped upon you, and having to do the confessions and having to do the penance and the this and the that, is because you're not good enough and you have to do all these things to become good. But then somehow you never feel good enough, because and it's interesting how many, ex-Catholics turned to Buddhism. I found.
Yeah, and I still struggle with that framework. Like, I still want to label things good and evil. I still find myself catching myself wanting to describe something as evil or bad, and then having to shift to, no, it's unskillful or something, or maladaptive or something, something, a less judgmental word, because I don't think the judgments are helpful. I think that they set up a dynamic that is unskillful, that's unhelpful. When we make those we keep every action, we try to fit into this moral framework, instead of just saying, well, that's skillful and this is unskillful, this is helpful and unhelpful, and those are judgment terms too. But there are a different type of, they're sort of just recognizing what's real rather than placing a judgment on it.
Right. Yeah, no, it's I wrote an article recently where I talked about some bad habits that I had given up, and I was putting this out for the general audience of Elephant Journal, and trying to say to people, hey, there's some kind of unconstructive habits you might have that you might want to think about giving up, and then and here's why it's kind of a good idea to do it. And one of the habits that occurred to me was this calling people bad and evil. And I remembered the days when I was much younger, back in the days of when Nixon was president. And Richard Nixon was one of those people that everybody loved to hate. I mean, there was a whole culture around hating him. And my mother had hated him earlier on when he was a younger, politician and so on. And so, we all sit around, of an evening and drink our, cheap red wine and talk about how we hated Nixon. And then that gets carried forward, and people talk in that kind of categorical, sloppy way about, oh, I hate this person and I hate that person. And, that doesn't do you any good to indulge in that. And what it does is it creates this schism in your world where you're separated from another person, and they're over there and you're over here, and you forget that they have a human life, and they've had things that have happened to them that have caused certain situations to occur.
Right.
And so that was, it was really nice to be able to kind of sit with that realization that I don't say I hate anybody anymore. You know, I say I have bad feelings about them, or that they make me, you know, I feel suffering because of what's going on. And, you know,
Right.
we don't have to stretch our imagination too far to understand who I might be
Yeah.
referring to.
Right. No. Yeah.
And, but it doesn't do any good to hate.
That's
Uh,
right.
and that was another principle that my grandmother lived by. Again, my marvelous grandmother, she really had tolerance for everybody, and she could disagree like crazy with people,
Mm,
or disapprove even, and not like the kinds of things that they did, not
right.
feel, but she would never say she hated them. She
Yeah.
would always imagine that they had an unfortunate series of situations in their life that caused them to be maybe a dislikable person, you know, or
That's right.
you know, a person who caused harm. Yeah.
I think it's too easy to give in to hate, and I see this happening on social media, and I know exactly who you're talking about, and I have the exact same types of feelings, and I feel the anger and the hatred rising in up in me, and then I do exactly what you're describing beautifully, which is where does this hatred get us, versus saying there's a human being and there's actions and there's words and actions coming from this human being that I disagree with, and I will confront and I will counter. But as soon as I just say F this person or I hate this person, then there's no hope for reconciliation. There's no hope for peace. There's no hope for progress, because it's just saying, no, I give up on that even being a potential or a possibility. And
Yeah,
I think that
it stops the process. Actually, it
right,
stops the process of healing and transformation and change, positive change, all the rest of it. Because you're slamming the door in, you know, and saying, uh, and you know, and slamming the doors of your mind, and you know,
yeah,
that's it. You know, there's no forward momentum.
sure,
And then the other thing that I remember, uh, you know, the Dalai Lama saying, I use references to him a lot. You know, he said, when he was asked about hating the Chinese for what they did to his country, he said, you know, I've gone through a lot of suffering in my life. You know, I had to leave my country. You know, I worry for my people, all the rest of it. I mean, the burden that that man has carried. And he said, you know, if I allow myself to hate the Chinese, that is going to cause me more harm. And why would I want to cause myself harm
right,
when I've got enough of a burden already, you know,
mm,
in me, you know, or on top of me. And so I thought that was wonderful to hear that he didn't have to allow that the poisonous, negative
that's right.
energy live in him.
That's my greatest fear, is that the anger and hatred becomes consumes you so much that poisons yourself, and poisons the whole possibility of transformation. And it's
Yeah.
and I think that's what I see happening, and that's what I and sometimes you get pushback from people. You say, listen, don't let the hate consume you. Just let's separate the actions and words from the person, and let's not be passive, but don't allow your heart to turn to stone in the process of trying to create change, or trying to help people be more skillful and think more critically, and rise up out of sort of ignorance. And but the hatred's just a poison that's poisoning everybody.
Right.
I want to ask you one last question, because we're running out of time here, and this will be sort of like the culmination of this conversation. You've had an opportunity to explore the world, and you also have been an explorer of your inner landscape. Which of those explorations have you found to be most valuable, and why?
That's a great question. And, when sometimes I'm asked questions that I have a hard time answering, because I want to say I can't choose. I frequently get asked, like, what's my favorite country to go to, or something like
Right.
that. You know, I can't, and I find it's hard for me to choose.
Yeah.
So I think that the inner journey, the travel journey, they both have been profound. And I think that the book that I wrote, which I'm really, so proud of, would not have occurred without both my need for that self transfer. I mean, to explore my own consciousness and my own journey, and also my need to go out and to learn about the world that I lived in. So both those things were there in me, sort of, and were contributing factors to the whole, substance of the book.
Yeah.
I can't imagine my life without the travel. I can't imagine what I would be like. And I can't imagine what I would be like if I hadn't been the introspective person searching for a true path and searching for, love and wisdom. So I guess I'm not going to say there's one answer or the other, if that's okay.
That's perfectly fine. Well, Mag, it has been a pleasure to speak with you today, and I wish you wellness and peace and joy. And it's always an honor to meet somebody who so freely talks about their lives and is willing to sort of share their wisdom with the world. And I just want to thank you for your time today, and it's been great to make this connection with you.
I've really loved it a lot, and I wrote the book because I wanted people to listen to my story, and now I do all these wonderful interviews, and I get all over again to share this stuff and have people listen to me, and because I love spreading things around that are interesting and helpful and maybe inspiring. It feels good to do that.
Well, thanks so much for doing it today. I appreciate it, Mag.
Right. Thank you.
That's Mag Dimond, and her book is Bowing to Elephants, Tales of a Travel Junkie. And you can go to her website, magdimond.com. That's MAGDIMOND. So not spelled like the jewelry. It's DIMOND. So magdimond, MAGDIMOND.com. And again, the book is Bowing to Elephants, Tales of a Travel Junkie. And again, thanks so much to Mag for her time today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And if you did, please subscribe to the podcast and share the podcast with your friends and your social networks. And you can always visit the website, teachersaligned.org, and connect with us on Facebook at Teachers Aligned, on Instagram at Teachers Aligned Network. So thanks again so much for listening to this episode. And thanks again to Mag Dimond. Bowing to Elephants, Tales of a Travel Junkie. Check it out and have a wonderful week.